All right, yeah. Welcome everyone to another episode of this podcast. Today we have with us my old friend Somdatta Bhattacharya, who recently did a PhD in okay, what was the area? What should I say?
Rensselaer Polytechnic
No.
Institute
Yeah,
of
but
Chemical Engineering.
what in chemical engineering? Yeah, she recently finished a PhD in chemical engineering from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Albany, New York
Upstate New
State,
York. Yeah.
upstate New York. And currently she is working as a vaccine developer, or should I say, in the vaccine development wing of a multinational company called Merck, which I believe is a German multinational company, right? Yeah, I just looked it up like 2 minutes ago. All right, Somdatta, welcome to this podcast, and thanks for agreeing to be here at such short notice. Let us begin by me asking you about your background. Like, what sort of things did you study in your chemical engineering, let's say, undergraduate course that helped you develop a love for research, and how did you then carry on into a PhD and now into like a post-PhD industrial yet research-focused job?
Great question, Rudradeep. I think we used to go to the same coaching classes, a few of them together.
Irrelevant.
Yeah, no, it is relevant. So you were the nerdy kid, like who was always into reading and all. And then I remember that I was the person who like hated studying a lot. Eventually that took a turn. Like when I got through my undergrad in NIT, I used to be like, oh my God, like I really have to study to pass the exams. and then I started studying, and then I developed this I don't know, I wouldn't call it passion or anything, but I really like the field of heat and mass transfer and how you're making all these products and I don't know, $1 billion industry. And I understood that I was really fascinated by chemical engineering as a whole. So you don't really think of chemical engineering as either chemistry or physics or any of it. It's like a amalgamation of a lot of subjects put together. And then I was very fortunate enough to have some undergrad profs who educated me and motivated me to pursue my ambition. I got a couple of internships throughout my undergrad degree. I went to IIT Kharagpur, I went to Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. I dabbled my fingers in all sorts of experiments that I could think of, be it oxidative chemical vapor deposition for batteries to fluid dynamics. And then I realized that, okay, I really like research. And after my undergrad, I had two options. Either I take up a job in one of the biggest oil and gas company in India, or I choose the minimum wage in USA and pursue PhD. My parents were like completely shocked that I would choose the PhD route, because they're like, you don't like money or what? Like, why are you going for PhD? And then I came here, met a few profs who were brilliant in what they do. Started again, like I never really had one focused area. I kept my mind open, tried different things, because I wanted to figure out what excites me the most. What is the area that I see myself working on till the day I retire? And I did not follow the conventional pathway, like, okay, this is what I want, right? And I was very fortunate enough to have RPI support those kind of weird dreams. And I think I worked on 5 or 6 different projects in my PhD. And I realized that, okay, after this, since I did a lot of research work, I really wanted to contribute to the industry. And that's what I say, like, I want to make a contribution to help people, no matter how far end of the spotlight area I'm in. I just want to make sure that whatever I'm working on, people are benefiting from it. And I'm actually saving the world even like 1 millionth in way. That's the reason I took up this vaccine job at Merck, and what we do is so motivating. Merck, I mean, you said that Merck is a German company. It started from Germany, but then it had expanded to US, and there's a whole story behind how Merck US, and that's what we call as MSD in Germany, is different, but also same in some ways. But Merck, I think, is doing a great job in vaccine development, vaccine process development. That's the area that I'm in. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, that's my whole journey right there.
But you never considered staying on in academia as a postdoctoral researcher somewhere after a PhD?
I did. My profs, my advisors in PhD did encourage me to try out postdoc areas. Um, but I don't know, somewhere in the final year of my PhD, I did realize that I did want to join the industry because that's where I can make actual, real, fast contributions. Academic, I feel, is great for research, for understanding what's going on in more details, but sometimes you get too lost and you don't really see the changes immediately. And I was ready to be in the industry and contribute, make that fast growing changes in any way that I could. And now also, one of the factors that is I graduated during a pandemic. So for me, getting into the industry was very, very vital because you don't really have you do, and I have so many other immigrants issues and everything. So I needed a stable job to at least be in that area in a mental state. So academic at that time was a bit difficult for me to pursue, if that makes sense.
And when coming back to one of the questions that I mentioned in my original email to you, so this area of vaccine development, so would it be fair to look at that as, let's say, a sub area within medical science or chemical engineering? I'm guessing that would be fair, right?
Kind of,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so then, like, I mean, in that vein comes the question of funding. If I am looking at a department, like say a good department at a good engineering university in India, and at the same time, I'm looking at, say, your university, the RPI in upstate New York, or any of the other universities along the east coast of the US, or anywhere else, basically, from where you do get excellent research contributions, like year in, year out. What do you think is the main like, let's say, differentiating factor? I mean, I in my email was pointing to funding. Like, is it just funding? Because if, let's say it's not funding, let's say it's also about intellectual resources. So, but if it is intellectual resources, is it fair even, I mean, could it even be the case that, let's say, at a certain point of time or at any given point of time, there are more motivated or more brilliant people, let's say, if we can define brilliance in that way, working somewhere that is not the universities in India that one might look at? Like, why is it the case that even now, with India producing so many chemical engineers, so many like medical people and all that, when it comes to research development, when it comes to progress in research, like actual progress in research, it is always like universities somewhere else that get to sort of come in the limelight. Like, yeah, why do you think that's happening?
Good question. One thing that comes to my mind is funding, definitely, right? Like, the infrastructure and the funding that US universities usually have is nowhere compared to where Indian universities get. It's a fact. But sadly, that's probably one of the reasons why we don't really get that kind of research advancement. But again, like, I have seen Indian universities and even Indian companies come across as shiny examples of what you can do with even minimal investment. Like, look at how Biocon was started, or look at even the industries that came up with the COVID kits and everything in India. They started small, grew big, showing people that, okay, money is not necessarily always the cause. But yeah, it's not as widespread of a development as it's in US. Definitely agree with that. I also think that USA in general, what I have seen is very diverse. There's people from all over the world working towards a common cause. When I was in India, maybe things have changed now in the last 5 years. When I was in India in NIT, I did not really see a lot of diverse sectors of people working and coming for a common cause. Most of the people I worked with were either from India or from the neighboring states, which is great. But I also think like having a diverse background in your company or university helps you grow. And because you get more ideas from people, and that also motivates you to work better, understand the topic better. But if you're like, that's I think one of the reasons, but also like it's hard to predict, right? You're comparing a developing country to a very highly developed country, so I don't think it's fair. And also for chemical engineering, India is just growing in that stream. And again, that's one of the causations of why it might be so far behind right now for US. But I don't think that's always going to be the case. In fact, India has one of the largest vaccine development industries in the world. The Serum Institute of Technology manufactures the highest number of vaccines. So there you go. That's another example of how
Manufactures, yes, but even with the sort of COVID vaccine, even in the COVID vaccine context, we can see that they got, what is it, a license? Or should we say a patent from like the AstraZeneca vaccine got manufactured in huge numbers by the Serum Institute. And in India, it was called Covaxin. No, it was called the Covishield, I believe. And also in the first few months of this episode, the Serum Institute had plans of distributing their vaccines to like a lot of poor countries all over the world, like starting from Kenya, Brazil, South Africa, lots of those places. And eventually things didn't go to plan because of many other factors. But still, that is not exactly, it is vaccine development in the literal sense, yes, but the sort of formula was developed somewhere else. They just got the patent to manufacture the vaccines in huge numbers, no?
I agree and also disagree. It's not always about developing a vaccine. Yes, for that you need a lot of research, you need a lot of advanced technology to work in, and maybe India right now does not have all that, and that's why they're lagging behind. But manufacturing a vaccine, I would say that's one of the most difficult challenges that I've seen in the industry. It's not as easy, it's not straightforward. You have to go through tons of protocol, you have to meet with so many agencies to make sure that what you're manufacturing is sterile, is not going to harm anyone. And those are some huge shoes to fill in. So I wouldn't necessarily always think of vaccine manufacturing as a second step, because that's the step without which, even if a vaccine is researched on, you can't really provide it to the country, to other people. So what India or Serum Institute is doing to me matters. The work that they are doing actually shows that, hey, even as a developing country, we are providing vaccines to so many people in the world. How many companies can say that from a developing country? And I think that's the part that makes me proud to be Indian, that, okay, at least there's a development in that sector. You don't necessarily have to be super man in every field, in every research point. As long as you do one job correctly, that's all that matters. We can go into like lengthy debates as to why India's vaccine research is not where other countries should be, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. You're not really comparing apples to apples here. Everything is different. Everything is different in a developed country versus a developing country. But I think we should highlight how far along India has come in all these sectors. And to me, that's commendable. It's very interesting to see how much we have progressed as a country.
And also, do you think this might have like this gap that we're talking about? And you correctly pointed out there is a huge technological factor here, which is not so much the case when it comes to, let's say, research in pure maths or research in philosophy, or like things that you can do like sitting at a table in a closed room. Whereas, when it comes to research in topics like, in vaccine development or things like that, you do need a lab, you do need like cutting edge technology at those labs. I was going to say, like, don't you think the attitude the general public or even the ruling class possesses towards the like research sector is also a problem. Like, didn't what's that guy's name? What's that guy's name? Poonawalla, something Poonawalla, the guy who runs the Serum Institute. Wasn't he threatened by some politicians from Karnataka or some state like that? And he had to apply for some kind of a special visa to stay in the UK. I don't know what happened in the end. And it was a very silly episode. Like, again, I believe this is what happened. I might be wrong here in some of the details. Like, some politician asked for some, like a huge number of doses of some vaccine because he wanted to stockpile. I think this is what happened. And Poonawalla said, no, I can't do that. And then there were threats against his family, threats made to him by people who were like acolytes of this politician guy. So, of course, this is a one-off example, but is this emblematic or reflective of what goes on in the society at large in India? Or do we just not have enough data to say anything?
You think that doesn't go on in any other country?
I don't know.
You should always take every news with at least that's what I do. I take it with I understand it. I try to understand where and why it's coming from. It's easy to pick and choose news, right? Like, you think of India and you see this happening and you're like, oh my God, like, see, this only happens in India. But that's not fair to say. Who is to say that in so many other countries that doesn't happen?
Okay.
How is it not happening how do you know it's not happening in the developed countries? There are so many news also about that. I don't want to like bring up names or the stories, but if you actually go back to the news, you will see that it does not matter whether it's India or any country, like let's say UK or anywhere else, right? Any part of the world at any time. You have to remember this was a pandemic, and this is a pandemic that we are going through. People are panicking. How people react in a situation, that might differ, but at the end of the day, this threatening by politicians and all these other stories that come up, that's not necessarily siloed in India. I don't think that's a fair analogy at all. I think we should be more aware of what's going on in the world to make or to come to that conclusion. Yes, I do know the story that you were talking about, Poonawalla facing those threats and everything, and he had to take shelter in UK. But I also don't believe it's a one-off story. Like, it happens. It's a very unfortunate incident. I hope that it does not happen in the future. But I don't think like we can generalize saying that, okay, this is what happens in India. Sure. I wouldn't be comfortable saying that it's a generalized conception for any country, right? Not because I'm an Indian and I'm saying that, oh, I don't think that happens in India. I would have said the same thing, be it China, Japan, Mexico, any country. I wouldn't be fair. I wouldn't be comfortable in calling it that way.
Okay. So we have, let's say, around 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes left. So let me come to another, like a completely different point now. When we think of scientific literature or research literature as like new publications get added to the canon, we almost always think of researchers or people who work at jobs that depend on the cutting edge, like new materials that are getting published. We only think of them focusing on what's coming out. We don't think of the general public being interested in what's coming out in the newest edition of, like, I don't know, Nature would be an easy example to pick, but any top science journal. And in most cases, that's understandable because, of course, if someone who is a banker is asked to read about some new development that has happened in mathematics or engineering, they will just not be interested. They will not see how that might affect their lives or whether that could affect their lives in any way. But when it comes to how people were reacting during this pandemic, especially last summer, to news about various new drugs that were coming out. For example, the Lancet had to retract some piece where they had said, I can't remember if it was hydroxychloroquine piece, like they had said that some drug had worked in some trial, or maybe hadn't worked at some trial, and then they retracted saying, oh, no, we were wrong. And the thing is, it is just how the industry of producing knowledge works in the academic world in most cases. If it's an evidence-based science, like the life sciences, and not a proof-based science, like, I don't know, theoretical physics, theoretical maths, philosophy, you can't just disprove something sitting in a room. It could be the case that a paper comes out today and it looks like a huge breakthrough, and in 2 years' time, some new data is uncovered, and some new data comes out, and you suddenly realize that someone had lied, someone had made up something, and the old paper is now totally like nonsense, it's totally useless. So don't you think that there is a huge gap in understanding among the general public about how scientific literature gets published, or especially about how knowledge is perceived to be produced, about how new knowledge is perceived to be produced in the evidence-based sciences, especially like, say, in medical science or things like that. So that is question one. Like, don't you think there is a gap? And B, what can one do to address that gap? Like, surely we can't ask people to read the pieces. So like, what can one do? What do you think?
Sure. Both are great questions. During my grad school, we actually went into a heated discussion because one of my colleagues was trying to replicate one of the articles and she just couldn't repeat it. And it came out in Science. So she was like, okay, what am I doing wrong?
Science is that the name of a journal?
Yeah, Science is a journal. So, and then it's one of the most reputed journals that we follow. So yeah, and we went into a discussion like, okay, maybe did you check all the things that were written there? Were there any assumptions that were not written in the paper that we are missing? So even as scientists, sometimes we can't replicate what has happened. But does that mean that we should doubt everything that comes out? It's a whole debate, right? Like, some people say that, yeah, of course, pinpoint and question everything that doesn't work. Some say that, okay, why not give benefit of doubt to the people who have carried it out? Maybe we are missing something that they know. And not every information can be made public because of the issue with patents and licensing.
Copyrights, yeah.
Exactly. So it's like a whole new topic of what can be disclosed and what can't be. And even as scientists, we sometimes struggle to find out like, okay, how were these exactly made? And I was working on nanofibers. Does not mean that I can replicate everything that was done in the Science journal or the Nature article that I was reading on nanofibers, because some information are just not made public. And there are some parameters, until and unless you know them, we can't really replicate them. But there are also another area of science, like what happened during the pandemic that we saw, like everyone became an expert overnight and was reading papers, thinking about it. And I don't have a problem with it. I think everyone should read. Everyone should make themselves knowledgeable on what's going on in the world. But I think the problem comes when people read only certain sections of a paper and come to a conclusion from it. Suppose one of the things that I saw, I think that was the Lancet article that you were talking about. These news journalists only pinpointed and highlighted one particular section of the story instead of like reading through the whole journal where actually a different conclusion was made. So if you make those kind of error, which can count up, because you're like sending it to the masses and the masses will trust you, right? Because you are a reputed newspaper that's publishing that, so they won't go back and try to read the article saying like, oh, that's not what the article said. So they're going to trust you. But if you're choosing to pick and choose information that you give to your followers, that's something that I have a problem with, like genuinely, because I hate seeing that happen. I have seen even my friends fall for like pick and choose sciences. And I just call them like, science cannot be in bite-sized nuggets. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of things put together. People are always researching on new technologies, but if you just insist on seeing it through one eyepiece and you just focus on one narrow thing which you like, which makes sense to your ideologies, then we are losing as scientists. because our job is to put out facts. Our job is not to form opinions. Our job is not to be on one side or another side. So it's also the public, right? You have to make yourself self-aware. There's only so much a scientist can do. They can give you the information, but at the end of the day, we are counting on you to read the whole article.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about life sciences, at least. And all these vaccines that came out, it went through so many clinical trials. Some people in some place, there's always a person who will have a side effect, but that's what modern science is. Not everything, we cannot assume that, okay, the vaccine won't affect anyone in a bad way. We try our best to make sure that that doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, we are human beings too. We are also learning. And it's sad. It's just sad when it happens. It breaks our heart, but it happens. And even look at motorbike accidents, look at car accidents. How many people die from that? Do they all go against the automobile manufacturers saying like, oh, why are you doing this? No one told us that.
And not just with vaccines, even with many regular drugs, there are adverse effects that are possible, but not common. I mean, they do happen very seldomly, but when they do, that's why they are like not happening all the time, and that's why those drugs are still being used. And on the other point about like reporting on science, I just think that as a matter of general principle, being a good science correspondent is an impossible job, because the person who is trying to be a good science correspondent did their degrees in journalism, like they studied journalism at university, and now suddenly they have to report on science. And by science, in some cases, it means all of science. So they might have to report on gravitational waves being discovered on, say, one day, and a few days later, they might have to report on a new vaccine. So it is never going to be the case that they know anything about the science that is
absolutely involved. And they don't have to know, right? Like they can easily contact one of the scientists in that paper, or some of the junior scientists I have seen, and even I was one of them, like so excited to talk about my research that came out in an article. And people like that are more than motivated to break it down and to make sure that the journalist understands it. So you don't really have to work all on your own. You can easily collaborate and try to understand it. And sometimes I understand because of time crunch, it's not possible. But I feel that's where our strength is, strength and power. If you talk to more people, if you try to understand before you present it to your whole country, then people will respect you more, that you're putting in the work, that you're presenting.
And also there's the issue with space, like in newspaper columns, even online. So if I am a science correspondent writing about something and I contact you for a comment and you give me, let's say, a paragraph of very detailed insight, and when I take that paragraph to my copy editor might say to me, well, that's all good, but we can't really print all that because you don't have the space. Let's cut that down to 2 sentences. So in some cases, that cutting down process can be justifiable, but in some other cases where it is a matter of life and death for the readership, for the people who are going to read the piece, such decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. And maybe one could even argue that in such cases, one can sort of try to do away with the space crunch factor as much as possible. Like, we are not going to care if we can't really accommodate all this in the amount of space given to us. We will just put a link to a separate area where all of this will be there. Anyway, so we can end now for today. Maybe actually the conversation was just heating up. We can maybe, I don't know, do a part 2 some weeks or some months down the line, if you'd be up for it.
Yeah, I know. My schedule was so hectic, Rudradev. I'm sorry. I like pushing it on and off.
I must commend you for suggesting today, because you could have easily said, okay, I can't do it. But you said, okay, how about tomorrow?
Yeah. But thanks for being so flexible. Like,
that's all right.
So many meetings are going on, and I'm glad that you were flexible enough to have it at a last minute call. So thanks for that. And yeah, sure. Anytime. Feel free to email me.
Okay, not anytime. Okay, anytime I can email you, but
Sure.
meeting won't happen anytime. It will happen.
Yeah, exactly. And like, like my schedule is pretty hectic. So
Yeah.
I'll probably let you know now of some date, and it might change. So
No problem.
sorry about that in
No problem.
advance.
No problem. Okay, yeah, let me thank you again for coming here, and I look forward to part 2.
Sure. It was my pleasure, Rosradeep. Thank you so
Okay.
much. You're a great host.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Anyway, let's stop recording now.
Okay.